Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen, and enjoy my stories every day. As the crisp December wind whisked through the bustling streets, the festive lights of the city cast a shimmering glow on the icy sidewalks. Mark, a successful software developer, strolled past the holiday displays with a thoughtful frown etched across his face. He had just picked up a final gift, a delicate silver bracelet, from a high-end boutique, the perfect accessory for his wife, Susie, or so he hoped. Walking into their cozy apartment, he found Susie humming to the tunes of a Christmas carol, her eyes lighting up as she noticed him. "What's that you've got?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "Just a little something for you," Mark replied, managing a smile as he handed her the neatly wrapped box. Susie's eyes sparkled with excitement as she unwrapped the gift, revealing the bracelet with its intricate design. "It's beautiful, Mark." "Thank you, darling," she gushed, leaning in to give him a peck on the cheek. Mark watched her clasp the bracelet around her wrist, the embedded GPS tracker unnoticed. "I'm glad you like it," he said, his voice hiding the turmoil within. Over the past few months, Susie's frequent late nights and secretive phone calls had gnawed at him. The tracker was his desperate bid for the truth. Over the next few days, Mark monitored the GPS data. Each ping on the map tightened the knot in his stomach, especially when Susie began visiting an unfamiliar area on the outskirts of the city. The seed of suspicion grew into a gnawing certainty. Finally, unable to bear the torment of not knowing, Mark decided to follow the signal one chilly evening. His heart pounded as he parked his car a block away from the indicated address, a quaint little house with a well-kept yard. The scene was quiet, too quiet for his racing thoughts. Creeping closer, he peered over the fence and caught his breath. There was Susie, laughing carelessly, sitting on a man's lap, her hands playfully exploring a guitar he held. The man, a stranger to Mark, returned her affection with an intimate familiarity that shattered Mark's world. The cold bite of the winter air matched the chill in Mark's heart. He stood frozen, watching the scene unfold, the sound of their laughter burning into his memory. He had given her a bracelet to bind them closer, yet here she was, breaking their vows with such ease. The hurt gave way to a cold resolve as Mark turned away from the fence. He knew what he had to do. This betrayal would not go unanswered. His mind raced with plans for revenge, each more vindictive than the last. As he drove back home, the festive lights blurred into streaks of color, mirroring the chaos within. "This is just the beginning, Susie," he muttered to himself, a sinister edge creeping into his voice. Just the beginning. Mark's mind was a tempest of betrayal and fury as he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The haunting image of Susie in another man's arms replayed endlessly in his mind. He had to confront her, but not with blind anger. He needed to be calculated, to trap her in her web of lies, to watch her entangle herself further. The next morning, as the sun cast a pallid light through the frosted windows, Mark prepared breakfast, his demeanor calm, almost serene. Susie entered the kitchen, her smile bright and oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. "Good morning," she chirped, pouring herself some coffee. "Morning," Mark replied, his tone neutral. "Sleep well?" "Like a baby," she said, settling into her chair. "What's on your agenda today?" "Just the usual meetings." "What about you? Any plans?" Mark prodded, watching her closely. "Just a day with the girls," she answered too quickly, avoiding his gaze. Mark nodded, keeping his suspicions hidden behind a practiced smile. "Sounds fun. Make sure you wear your new bracelet." "It suits you beautifully," he said, the double entendre lost on her. Susie glanced at her wrist, smiling. "I will. It really is lovely." As Susie left for her day out, Mark got into his car and followed her discreetly. The GPS led him again to the same unfamiliar house. This time, he didn't stop at just watching. He took photos of her entering the house, the joy in her steps unmistakable. Later that evening, when Susie returned home, Mark was ready. He sat her down in the living room, his heart pounding but his voice steady. "Susie, we need to talk," he began, his eyes locking onto hers. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong, Mark?" "I know about him," Mark stated bluntly, the words hanging heavy in the air. Susie's face drained of color. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice was too high, too thin. Mark tossed the photos onto the coffee table. "Then how do you explain these?" His voice was a mix of pain and accusation. Susie picked up the photos, her hands trembling. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she looked up at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "Mark, I can explain. I gave you that bracelet because I loved you. I thought it was a symbol of our trust," Mark continued, his voice breaking. "And you used it to deceive me." "It's not what it looks like," she pleaded, her voice desperate. "Save it, Susie." "I've seen enough," Mark cut her off, standing up. His next words were cold, calculated. "I want a divorce." Susie sobbed, reaching out to him. "Please, Mark, let's talk about this." "No," he said firmly, stepping back. "There's nothing left to discuss. You've made your choice, and now I've made mine." As he walked away, leaving Susie crying in the living room, Mark felt a hollow victory. His heart was shattered, but his resolve was firm. This was just the start. His plans for retribution were only beginning to take shape. The following days were a blur of cold interactions and legal consultations for Mark. As he sat across from his lawyer in the stark, sterile office, he laid out his intentions with chilling precision. "I want to ensure the divorce is as quick and seamless as possible," Mark stated, his voice devoid of emotion. His lawyer, a seasoned professional with graying temples, nodded, tapping notes into his laptop. "I'll make sure you get the best possible outcome. Do you have any specific demands regarding the settlement?" "Everything," Mark said flatly. "She deserves nothing from me after what she's done." The lawyer hesitated, then sighed. "I'll do what I can, but we need to be realistic. Given your financial situations, a clean sweep is ambitious." Mark leaned forward, his eyes hard. "Make it happen. She thinks she played me for a fool. I want her to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Meanwhile, Susie was desperately trying to reach out to Mark, calling, leaving voicemails, and sending texts, all of which he coldly ignored. Her pleas filled his phone, but he deleted them with a detached swipe. His heart had turned to stone, there was no room for mercy. Later that week, Mark implemented the next phase of his plan. Using his tech expertise, he began to discreetly sabotage Susie's social presence. Overnight, her emails were mysteriously deleted, her social media accounts were compromised, and rumors of her infidelity began to circulate among her friends and family. Susie's confusion and distress grew with each passing day. Her social life crumbled as friends turned their backs, unwilling to associate with someone who had so publicly betrayed her husband. One evening, Mark watched from his car as Susie, isolated and distraught, confronted a group of former friends outside a restaurant. The conversation escalated quickly, voices raised, fingers pointing, until Susie was left alone on the sidewalk, her body shaking with sobs. Mark felt a twinge of satisfaction seeing her despair, but it was overshadowed by a relentless drive for more retribution. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the car window. He looked up to see a private investigator he had hired days earlier. "I have the information you requested," the PI said, handing over a folder. "It's all there, details about the guy she was with, his background, everything." Mark took the folder, a sinister plan forming. "Good work," he murmured, flipping through the documents. The man was not just a random fling, he had a history of seducing married women. With this new ammunition, Mark's plan took on a darker edge. He contacted a few well-chosen individuals who would be interested in knowing about this man's less savory activities. If he was going to ruin Susie's life, he might as well drag down the man who helped do it. That night, as Mark lay in bed, he realized that his heart no longer ached for Susie. It was consumed by a vendetta, one that would not end until he felt that the scales of justice were tipped entirely in his favor. As sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was a simple acknowledgement of the path he had chosen: revenge is a dish best served cold. As autumn faded into a bleak, harsh winter, Mark's relentless campaign against Susie reached its zenith. His once warm home now stood cold and empty, a stark reminder of the life he had meticulously dismantled. The private investigator's findings had given Mark not just a target but a weapon. He had exposed the other man's deceitful practices to his employer, leading to a swift and ignoble firing. Word of his misdeeds spread, ensuring he would not find peace or employment in the city again. But Mark's thirst for revenge remained unquenched. One frigid evening, Mark arranged for a final meeting with Susie, at a secluded cafe away from familiar eyes. As he waited, his mind replayed every lie, every deceitful smile she had given him, fueling his resolve. Susie arrived, a shadow of her former vibrant self, her eyes hollow, her steps uncertain. She spotted Mark and hesitated before taking the seat across from him. "Mark, she began, her voice trembling. "Save it," Mark cut her off sharply. "I know everything, Susie. This is the end." Susie's eyes widened with fear. "Mark, please, I never wanted." "It doesn't matter what you wanted," Mark snapped. "It's what you did that counts. And you're going to pay for it. You already are." He slid a folder across the table towards her. It contained the photos, the evidence of her betrayal, and the trail of destruction he had left in her life. "You've lost your friends, your lover, your reputation. I made sure of it." Susie leafed through the folder, her hands shaking. Tears streamed down her face as she absorbed the extent of Mark's revenge. "How could you be so cruel?" she whispered. "How could you think you'd get away with betraying me?" Mark retorted with a cold laugh. "I wanted you to feel my pain." Susie looked up, her eyes desperate. "There's something you need to know. It's not what you think. I was helping him with music, that's all. It was never an affair. He's my cousin, Mark. I thought you knew." Mark froze, the blood draining from his face as the realization dawned on him. He had never asked, never verified, just assumed the worst. "No, that can't be. You're lying." "It's the truth, Mark. Why didn't you just ask me?" Susie's voice broke. But Mark's mind raced past her words, consumed by the gravity of his own actions. He had ruined her life, and his, on a premise that was never true. The cold, hard truth hit him like a wave, and suddenly, the world seemed to spin out of control. I need to go," Mark muttered, standing abruptly. He stumbled out of the cafe, his heart pounding, his mind a whirlwind of regret. He walked aimlessly through the streets, the cold biting into his bones. Every step felt heavier, every breath a reminder of his irreversible choices. Days turned into weeks. Mark's life unraveled as the truth of his mistake consumed him. His career, his friendships, his very will to live, deteriorated. One chilly evening, as the snow began to fall softly, Mark stood on a bridge overlooking the icy river below. The water looked peaceful, inviting. With a final look at the quiet world around him, Mark took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Susie," he whispered to the wind, and let go of the railing. As the frigid waters closed over him, the last threads of the tragedy he had woven pulled tight, sealing the fate of two lives destroyed by a misunderstanding and a quest for vengeance too blind to see the truth.